Hello, and let's get straight into it today. First, listen to this section of an interview from the excellent Cracked Gets Personal podcast.
He would say nice things to me, and even before, but I just remember one time I was sitting in the break room and he came in and I was dancing and he commented on how attractive I was. And from there, it intrigued me that he would make a comment like that, so I followed him down the hallway. And this was a man that was 35 years older than me. So he was in his late 40s when it started and close to 60 by the time that it was ending.
Listen one more time, see if you can spot the difference.
I mean, he would say nice things to me and, stuff like that. I mean, even before, but I just remember one time I was sitting in the break room and he came in and I was dancing or something and he commented on how attractive I was, I think. And from there, I guess it sort of intrigued me that he would make a comment like that, so I followed him down the hallway. And I mean, this was a man that was 35 years older than me. So he was in his late 40s when it started and close to 60, I think, by the time that it was ending.
The more eagle-eared of you will have noticed the first version had all the discourse markers removed, such as like, I mean, I guess, something like that, and so on. Now, regardless of how you feel about discourse markers, for example, like gets a pretty bad press these days, associated with people who are maybe not so good at stringing their ideas together. They are a feature of natural fluent English, and yet they're very rarely taught in classes. So I spoke to Jon Campbell-Larsen, and not only does the interview start with 2 discourse markers, but also starts with the question I'm sure a lot of you are thinking. All right, so we're talking about discourse markers today. So for the uninitiated, what is a discourse marker?
A discourse marker is, the characteristics of discourse markers are they're usually very, very small words and expressions, 1 or 2 words long. Mm-hmm. They don't really have a propositional meaning themselves. Okay. They kind of affect what happens either side of them. Mm-hmm. And people use them to give, as the name suggests, discourse markers. They show the structure of the discourse. They indicate on a kind of higher level than just propositional language what's going on in the current interaction. Okay,
what are the most common ones if you look at the corpus?
Well and you know and I mean are very, very high frequency words. Mm-hmm. I think those are the main ones that we should focus on in language teaching.
Right. I suppose like would be quite a common one these days.
Like is very much up there. There is some corpus examinations of like and its usage as to exemplify, to introduce reported speech, to highlight, and like, and it's especially a marker amongst younger people.
Right. So I guess the question is, why should we teach it?
Well, why should we teach anything, really? I guess my idea is that we don't want to go down the path of native speakerism and say you have to speak like this, but from my perspective, when I'm studying a foreign language, if somebody teaches me these kind of things, mm-hmm. I'm just really, really pleased to learn them, that this is the way you say it in Japanese or this is the way you say it in German. And I want to incorporate those because I understand the vital importance of these words mm-hmm. in managing discourse, in signaling to the listener what's going on or what you expect or your reaction to what they've said, rather than just an exchange of propositional statements. Right. So they're absolutely central and key to any kind of phatic social interaction.
So I guess what would be the difference in how speech sounds when students don't use them? Yeah,
very much so. The research that I've read has quite clearly shown, I think, that when people don't have these in their kind of active speaking skills, it doesn't matter how good the vocabulary or grammar is, there is something deficient. There's a feeling that there's something amiss here. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Japan, where I teach, one of the things that actually happens is speakers of very wide-ranging levels, from very low level to actually quite advanced speakers, sometimes they use their L1 discourse markers in their L2, it can be quite kind of intimidating. And because I speak Japanese, they don't register so badly, but I say to the students, when you go abroad, I remember when I first went to Japan, I wanted to know what these words were. I couldn't understand why people were using them in the language, and it disrupted the flow of conversation. So I think teaching discourse markers has this 2-step thing. First of all, remove L1 discourse markers from your L2 speech. Second, put L2 markers in the L2 speech. So it's a two-step process.
Yeah. Do you think some teachers or students might even think that discourse markers are actually disrupting the conversation, almost like they're diluting the purity of a straight sentence?
Very much so. Again, the literature that I've read has got lots and lots of quotations referring very negatively to the use of these, and people who overuse them and people who use them just too much. And the fact of the matter is, when you take authentic spoken interaction and you transcribe it, it's there. It doesn't matter anything which isn't scripted or over-rehearsed, it's there. It's impossible to speak without these. And the idea that they're somehow deficient or corrupting, or it's just nonsense.
Right. So I guess how do we go about teaching them then? If they are so natural, is it artificial to even teach them?
Well, I find that a lot of students, they've got no concept of these things. They have no real idea. Or even if they have kind of come across them, it was once in an aside during a lesson 10 years ago. Okay. And they've got this idea that, oh, well is a word that we sometimes use in conversation. And they generally forget to use it. Right. And, we've got to show the importance of these for their actual functional use in language, the way that they do the business of keeping the conversation going and signaling intentions and signaling reactions. We have to show how frequent they are, how important they are, how frequent they are, and try to habituate learners to using them automatically. Okay.
So the first stage is awareness, I guess.
Awareness, yeah.
So how about actual practice then? Actual drills or classroom interactions?
So one of the problems with discourse markers is they are so kind of automatic, and that automaticity is one of the key defining things of them. They come out without any pre-planning. People don't think, oh, I'll say I mean when I'm about 10 seconds into the next utterance. Because they're automatic, it's difficult to move from I don't know anything about these to use them automatically. So there has to be a kind of a drilling and a kind of a focus on them. And I do this with students. I have them speaking to each other, and sometimes I give them fairly simple Q&A style anchets, these kinds of things. And when they answer, the student answers, what did you do last weekend? I went out with my friends. So what did you do last week? You forgot well. And I've just got to drill it in. And I find that over a period of weeks and months of just constantly focusing on this week after week after week, gradually they start to drift into using them semi-habitually and semi-automatically.
So it wouldn't just be one single class that you do it?
Of course not, no. Whatever speaking activity we're doing, always I insist I write on the board, don't forget your discourse markers. It doesn't matter if we're talking past perfects or reported speech or any of the other canonical language targets. If it's a speaking activity, don't forget your discourse markers.
Right. I think one of the interesting things you'd mentioned was about how this affects questions and the quality of the answers.
Conversation is jointly constructed. It's both people have to be putting a lot of work into keeping the conversation going, this notion of co-construction. And because of the nature of classroom discourse, there's the Sinclair and Coulthard, the IRF, initiation, response, feedback loop, that teacher asks a question. The teacher might ask a question to which he already knows the answer. The student then provides an answer which is supposedly correct in its propositional content and its form. And then the teacher provides feedback on, yes, that's right. And I think that classroom discourse, it's the main source of spoken English that students are exposed to. So, of course, that translates into their non-teacher-centered interactions also take that kind of form often, as we saw in the video that I showed. It was a question followed by an answer. Same person asks another question, same person provides a minimal answer. And the conversation just kind of limped along in this kind of semi-interview style.
Almost like a bad first date.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And, these interactions, the students, they know that this is uncomfortable, it's kind of not real, there's something not quite right about this. But because they've been taught to focus on getting the actual answer right, maybe the teacher asks a question, so in the textbook, what time did they say they're going to meet? They say they will meet at 6 o'clock. Yes, very well. The teacher already knew that because he'd read the textbook. The purpose of the question wasn't to get new information or to start a conversation or anything else. The purpose of the question was very far from normal conversation. The purpose that we ask questions in conversations can very, very strongly affect the way they answer and the kind of discourse and interaction that follows after that.
I see. Well, I mean, speaking of textbooks, like, what do you think of the quality of the dialogues that are in textbooks?
Getting better.
Really?
Getting better. I've noticed, I mean, from when I first started teaching English, I've noticed that these dialogues are becoming much more naturalistic. They're still not perfect because, of course, they are unrehearsed. They are rehearsed, sorry. And when it's scripted, it doesn't matter how naturalistic you try to be. A properly scripted conversation with all of the overlaps and the interruptions and the hesitations and the restarts and all of the other things which are part and parcel of normal interaction can't really be represented in a language textbook.
Right.
It would just be too chaotic and too challenging. So there has to be a kind of a leveling. And when I first started teaching, these conversations were very much of the question-answer format. And now they're getting better. I think one of the best textbooks for this is the Touchstone series by Michael McCarthy.
Okay, really?
Because that's based on corpus linguistics, and the conversations, they do have these naturalistic... And the actual lesson targets are interactional language, the ways that native speakers use language to express certain interactional goals rather than just propositional goals.
So for classes that have like graded assignments at the end, how would you go about adding this into a rubric?
Oh, very difficult. I mean, my idea is that if the administration doesn't understand the value of this, the value of the centrality of conversation, so we get ideas of a balanced syllabus, the 4 skills. And of course, the 4 skills are not balanced in real life. We don't spend most of our time writing or reading. We spend most of our time speaking. And speaking is the thing we do most, but it's one of the hardest things to evaluate. And I think administrations, it's just untidy for them. They don't like it. So we have to convince administrations and other stakeholders, A, that spoken interaction is very important, and it's actually the goal of language learning. B, we have to convince them that we've got an actual systematic way of thinking about conversation. It's not just the intuitive sense that speakers have, oh, he's a good speaker, he's not a good speaker. No, there are ways which we can teach people to be good speakers, good interactants, that's the point.
Right.
Not good speakers, good interactants in the language. And once administrations and other stakeholders, test makers, understand this, then there might be some more kind of leeway to introduce it in a more official way. And teachers need to be trained on this as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Even teachers need to be aware of
awareness,
teaching it,
and then teaching. I mean, our profession is, I think, characterized by a large amount of people who enter the profession and stay in it for 2, 3, 4 years, and the decline of people who stay in it for 20 or 30 years is probably much less numbers. So in a way, we've got this continual new wave of novice teachers in the way that other professions might not have. And these novice teachers quite often are not aware of some of these basic things, and they leave the profession before they become aware and start to incorporate them in their teaching.
And yet probably those novice teachers probably use more discourse markers because naturally they haven't had it trained out of them yet.
Right.
So if someone was really interested in this and wanted to start applying it, what's a good place to start? Are there any good materials or good websites?
I can't answer to websites. As I say, the materials, I would recommend the Touchstone series by Cambridge by Michael McCarthy. That's got some very good information about interactional language, spoken language. And if you want to go more academic, there's vast fields of very, very recondite literature about discourse marking and about these interactional things. It depends how deeply you want to go into it. But to be honest with you, most of the ESL websites I visit, they're actually kind of pedestrian. It's the passives, causatives, restricted clauses, etc., that we've all taught, and very, very little is out there for teaching the actual way that speakers of, not just English, because this would apply if you were studying Japanese or German or French, whatever, the actual way that speakers use the language is very, very kind of, it's almost like willfully blind.
So I wonder, in that case, would it be better just for a teacher to go onto YouTube and find any kind of unprepared speech and just pay attention to what's going on?
Very much so. I've used materials with students where I've downloaded something or gotten a video of. It has to be authentic, unscripted, unrehearsed speaking. Now, the genres could be difficult. I analysed a discussion program. Okay. So even though a discussion is different from a conversation, it was still naturalistic and unrehearsed. And as I say, I just edited and I put little 5-second slots of these instances of well and you know and I mean and actually. And then I transcribed those parts and we watched them. We saw the phonological kind of qualities of it. And then we looked at the larger contexts and the students looked at the discourse markers and we had to try and decide what was going on here. Why did this person say this at this time? Right. And that's maybe a little bit high level for a lot of students, but just the frequency at which these occur, showing even low-level students the frequency of these words in the language and also connecting it to their own language. Saying, you do this in your language too. You have discourse markers in your language. Right. And when I speak to the students and I'll try and say something in Japanese using Japanese discourse markers, I say something without markers, then I repeat the same utterance with markers, and the students immediately see this is so much more naturalistic. This is exactly like the goals of what a language learner should be looking at, trying to be able to do.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. Really interesting stuff there. Thank you.
Great.
And for anybody interested, I've uploaded an example handout for practicing discourse markers onto the website. There will be a link in the notes attached to this podcast. Don't say I never do anything for you.